Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this weekly public affairs show. Today, we're going to talk about the abhorrent silencing and erasure of women by Islamist regimes in Iran and Afghanistan.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at ffrf.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Women's faces, bodies, and rights are being controlled and erased, and now their voices silenced in Afghanistan and Iran. We have an expert back with us today to talk about those situations, as well as more general violations of human rights in Islamist nation. That is, nations with Muslim theocracies.
Our guest today is international activist, atheist, feminist, and secularist Maryam Namazie, who with her family had to flee Iran after the Islamic Revolution there, and she's now based in the UK and with the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and Maryam campaigns to end apostasy and blasphemy laws, to defend secularism and universal rights and equality. She hosts the weekly Bread and Roses TV show, produced in both English and Persian. Maryam Namazie has received many awards and recognitions for her activism, including from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we're very glad to see you again. Welcome back to Freethought Matters, Maryam.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with the two of you and with your members and viewers.
It was so nice to see you in person, Maryam, last month at the Celebrate Dissent conference in Oslo. This was the 10th anniversary of the first Celebrate Dissent conference, and FFRF's been delighted to be a supporter of them. So why Celebrate Dissent, and who speaks at these events?
Well, Celebrating Dissent, the idea behind it, actually, it's been 10 years since the large conferences that we've been organizing. For example, this year there was 50 speakers from nearly 30 countries and the diaspora. So these larger conferences have been 10 years. But we've been organizing conferences since 2008. And the idea behind them is in order to celebrate things that are seen to be taboo and looked down upon. So, for example, blasphemy, apostasy, they've got very negative connotations because we often look at them from the views and the narrative of the religious people and the religious right. And in fact, they are things that should be celebrated because progress throughout society has come as a result of blasphemies and apostasies. And so that's why we call it Celebrating Dissent, because it's here where we can, at these events, where we can really show ourselves, given the fact that so many feel that they need to hide, or whether it's from fear of death threats or fear of family, or because it's something that is often seen, as I said, so negatively. So it's there to celebrate both those that do it and also to celebrate the very ideas of blasphemy and apostasy and a defense of free expression.
You know, what you're saying is reminding me of a quote by Hypatia Bonner Bradlaugh, who was the daughter of Charles Bradlaugh, who was that first atheist to be seated in Parliament. And she said, heresy makes for progress. But when we're there at this conference, we are always amazed at how many people there have had to flee their home countries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
If you live in a theocracy like in Iran or Afghanistan, and countries where religion plays a big role in the law, in the state, in public policy, of course that has huge effects, negative effects on people's rights and their lives and their freedoms. And so it's obvious that very often people will be persecuted for not necessarily even their political beliefs or, let's say, their atheism or their apostasy, but the very fact of who they are. For example, being a woman, I think, under theocracies, Islamic theocracies, is the same as being a criminal, really. It's criminalized. So a lot of things that we take for granted, like, wearing what we want to wear, listening to the music we want to, loving who we want, studying what we want, traveling wherever we want, all of these are restricted and denied to women, for example. And so it's obvious that there will be many who are fleeing this type of persecution, whether it's based on belief and whether it's based on political opinion, or based on, gender-based persecution, sexual minorities, religious minorities. And that's why I think it's really important always to defend refugee rights as well, because really so many people are fleeing because they want to live free, they want to have rights. And that's another argument for why a lot of these rights and freedoms that sometimes people say are Western, really they're universal because people are demanding them everywhere. And many have to flee as a result of this demand and desire to live lives that are free and where they have full rights.
We have a very short clip of you from that Celebrate Dissent conference where you're talking about blasphemy. And let's look at that.
I know that the history of blasphemy is considered to be predominantly male, but I would argue that it is female. Because being a woman in and of itself is an act of blasphemy.
So this brings up the second anniversary of the death of Mahsa Amini that occurred in September 16th. She died in 2022. Maryam, can you remind us what happened to Mahsa Amini and so many other women and what has happened in Iran since then?
Yeah, well, Mahsa Jina Amini, she has become an icon across the globe. She's someone that was killed for improper veiling by the morality police in Iran. And her murder, really, for a few strands of hair, sparked a woman-life freedom revolution there that has inspired people across the globe. And it's really, again, shows very clearly that whilst we have heard for so many decades women's rights are Western, that women in Iran or Afghanistan, they want Islamic rules and laws, they like the hijab is a tool for liberation, and all of that nonsense anti-woman propaganda that we've heard that has really been spearheaded by the Islamist right, the religious right. We see very clearly, in fact, that the demand and desire is very much something that is not Western, but it is universal. And that revolution that was sparked, it's an ongoing one, where you see women, for example, burn their veils, you see young people running up behind clerics and throwing off their turbans. It's called the turban flying phenomenon. And what you see is a very deeply modern, a secular, an anti-clerical, and even an anti-religious, really, revolution and movement spearheaded by a Generation Z that no longer has any illusions towards any aspect of an Islamic state.
And we actually have some footage that you have shared of what you call it's the turban throwing going on in Iran that is really amazing to see.
It's funny.
Can you kind of explain what's going on there?
Yeah, again, people are, it is a clerical rule in Iran. It is run by the clerics. And so this is one way of diminishing the power of the clerics. They rule everything. The parliament, so-called parliament, is filled with clerics. It is their rule that applies, their Sharia laws, their religious rules. And so this is one way of resisting in a very creative sort of funny way
Yes.
of resisting clerical rule, a rule that's deeply misogynist, hateful, but also very violent. You know, since the protests that you mentioned, since the death of Mahsa Amini, for example, you know, 18 to 20,000 people were arrested for taking part in the protests. Hundreds have been executed. The executions have been stepped up now as well. It's all through attempts to silence people and to stop them from protesting. But the protests continue. I mean, if you look at pictures of major cities in Iran today, a large number of women are walking the streets unveiled, which again just goes to show how difficult it has been for the regime to control people in general, but women in particular. And that was my point I was making, that the very act of being a woman is an act of blasphemy. And a woman unveiling is a huge challenge to theocratic rule.
Well, if this young woman could be tortured and killed, just a little bit, she had a scarf on, just a little bit of strand of hair showing. I mean, you have to wonder what's wrong with the human race. I guess it's really the religion at fault, but
in patriarchy.
Incomprehensible.
The fact is, though, that it is a battle, and there's lots of people in Iran who are challenging these rules. A lot of men have raised the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom." So it is this battle between a theocracy and people that want none of it.
So at the conference, there was obviously a lot of serious, heavy, even tragic talk. I mean, people are afraid for their lives. But on the other hand, it was a celebration. And as we saw, there was a lot of laughter about the turban and music. And so how can you combine a happy celebration with such a heavy topic that we're all facing?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is that, we're faced with a very brutal religious right movement. And, we're faced with the Islamists, but you have the rise of the Christian right, for example, in the United States. We're seeing religious right movements in various countries, like the Hindu right or the Buddhist right, the Jewish right. They have hugely negative effects on people's lives, and they target and come for women first. I think one of the ways in order to challenge this movement is, of course, through creativity, through mockery, through laughter, because they try to deny all forms of people's voices and expression. Like in Afghanistan now, the Taliban have banned women's voices. In Iran, women are not allowed to sing as well. So it is really important to have this sort of creativity that challenges a very brutal, a very violent, and a very dark and bleak sort of movement. And I think creativity humanizes us. It challenges the religious right in a really fundamental way. You know, they want women erased. They want a resistance and dissent erased. This type of creativity actually brings this resistance to the center of society.
Well, we want to share a short clip also of some of that creativity at the Celebrate Dissent Oslo conference. We had a turban throwing there, right? And throwing up our hijabs, right?
Yes, turban flying and hijab flying in solidarity with women in Iran and Afghanistan. You know, one of the things that some of us are working towards, there's been a large number of activists and lawyers and academics from Afghanistan and Iran that have initiated a campaign calling for an end to gender apartheid, an end to sex apartheid, and calling on the United Nations to recognize gender apartheid as a crime against humanity in the same way that racial apartheid is considered a crime against humanity. And so I think any sort of challenge of these sort of restrictions and limitations that are placed on women, whether it be, with regards to the veil, whether it is mixing of the sexes, when gender segregation and sex segregation is so much part and parcel of the society, these are important ways of resistance. I mean, in Iran, for example, you have a curtain that divides the sea between women and men. You have separate entrances for women to enter government offices. You have segregation in education. Of course, we know in Afghanistan, women and girls are not even allowed to go to school anymore. And so this is really such a huge violation of women's rights. But because it is against women, it often is seen to be business as usual, because women are often seen to be extensions of male honor and culture and society. And so very often we see that, it's permissible to do whatever you want with women. And I think this fight back in Iran and Afghanistan, in a place like Rojava, which is a feminist center in Syrian Kurdistan, which is a war zone, these are all ways that women are fighting back, and very often with the support of a large number of men.
When we come back, Maryam, we want to talk with you more about how women are being silenced in the Islamic world.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Patrick, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. 9 years ago, I saw Dan Barker debate Christian apologists at the University of Wisconsin. They were discussing the resurrection of Jesus and whether or not it was true. At the time, I was Catholic and was very convinced Dan was wrong and that, in fact, the story was true. That debate prompted me to take a course on early Christian literature, and I, in fact, learned more and questioned my own beliefs. The more I read and the more I learned, the more I came to realize that I was being pretty much intellectually dishonest. Fast forward to 9 years later, I'm now an employee at FFRF and work for the vital mission of separation of state and church. I'm proud to be an out-of-the-closet atheist.
Freethought Matters is back, and our guest today is the ever-fearless Maryam Namazie, a feminist, secular activist with the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. Maryam, there was a lot of music by women at that Celebrate Dissent conference in Oslo that we've been talking about. What were we just listening to? Was that Farsi?
Yes, that was Farsi. And actually what was interesting is this is about women political prisoners in Iran who are in the notorious Evin prison, who are sending out messages of support and solidarity during the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's murder, and singing slogans, singing revolutionary songs. So even in the notorious Evin prison, the women's political prisoners from the women's ward are resisting and are leading, in fact, one of the main leaders of this Woman and Life Freedom Revolution.
Well, it's a very moving song, and am I remembering correctly that one of the women attorneys recently died there? There's been so many imprisoned.
Basically, there are lots of women political prisoners and others who are on death row, and they have stepped up the executions. And so, it is really a tsunami of executions. The regime has executed, they say, nearly 100,000 people over the past 44 years of its rule, many buried in mass graves, for example, during the notorious 80s, where they executed 5,000 people in just the summer of 1988, for example. So they've always relied on executions in order to try to suppress dissent and to suppress resistance against this regime. But what's clear now is that this generation is not stopping, it's not backing down.
So they're very brave, and we saw the turban throwing, and we've seen women without veils, but also the arrest, detentions, executions. Is there hope? You know, we had hope maybe that this might overthrow the regime, but it's going to take more than this, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think it is very hopeful in the sense that we see this mass uprising of people saying no to a theocracy, and also the fact that it's led by women. I think that's hugely important because, you know, you're dealing with a movement that is deeply misogynist, and having women as its primary challenger is you know, a very important watershed moment in the history of Iran. But also, I think we're seeing the sort of women's revolutions from Rojava to Iran. We had a speaker from Afghanistan at the conference, for example, who was on the front lines of the protest against the Taliban. I mean, imagine having the courage to stand in protest against the Taliban. So these, you know, these are important movements. But of course, as we know, and as history, you know, tells us, that there are huge amounts of social, political movements, revolutions that, you know, herald a possibility of reimagining the world to be different, to be better, to be pro-woman, for example. But things are not guaranteed. These are battles that take place. And those that the women and men who stand with them are challenging are hugely powerful. And they have the support of very many other governments, including Western governments. And so I think the issue is that whether this revolution will succeed does depend a lot on the sort of support and solidarity it gets, not from governments, but from people, from secularists, from freethinkers, from rights activists, from feminists across the globe. And I think that is very important. Another aspect, of course, is putting pressure on the governments of the countries we live in to stop having relations with the Islamic regime of Iran. We saw that happen during the anti-apartheid movement, during the anti-racial apartheid movement. There was all this pressure that came about that forced governments to stop having relations with the racial apartheid regime. And now we need to say no more relations with gender apartheid regimes in Iran and Afghanistan.
So there was more than one woman singer, songwriter, performer from Islamist nations who'd had to flee at the Oslo conference. And I was particularly struck by Faravaz, whose music, I don't know if we just heard her, but can you tell more about Faravaz's experiences, why she had to flee Iran?
Yeah, I mean, again, Faravaz fled because she was going to be arrested for singing, because women's voices are banned. And imagine something so natural, you know, for women to be able to sing. And if you love to sing, that is so much part of, and she's got such a beautiful voice, so much a part of who you are. And she set up a foundation called The Right to Sing, because women should have the right to sing, girls should have the right to sing. And again, it's just, you know, this is the thing with this resistance against Islamist movements and states. Everything you do that is part and parcel of you living your life, a life of your choosing, comes face to face with repression. You can't sing. You can't hold hands with someone you love. You can't have sex outside of marriage. You can't love someone if, for example, you're gay. You can't study certain fields. For example, women can't be judges because they're considered too emotional. You can't travel or work without the permission of your male guardian. That includes, you know, in Iran as well. So these laws are really focused and obsessed with controlling and policing women's bodies and their lives and their rights. And that's why the very fact of Farah's singing is an act of resistance in the same way that turban flying is or removing your hijab is.
And Farah actually did sing for us at the conference, which was pretty moving. There were so many moving moments. You showed a number of films there also, and I remember one of the women in the film said, I left my faith, I had to leave my family, I had to leave my country, and my father told, I love my family, but my father said if I ever come home, he's going to kill me. I mean, they're living under that kind of pressure. Do you remember who made that film or who the filmmakers were at the conference?
Yeah, there was a couple of films that was shown. I think the one you're referring to is Islam's Non-Believers. Filmmaker for that was Dia Khan. Yeah. And it followed the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, the work that we do, and also internationally, what is happening to ex-Muslims across the globe. You know, there were other films as well. For example, Nadia Al-Fani, she had a film which was No Harm Done, which was basically her comparing the cancer she had at the time with the cancer of Islamism that was taking over her country, Tunisia. So lots of moving films and lots of really hard-hitting ones. But again, I think a lot of, as you say, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of terror, but there's also a lot of resistance. And I think you see that very clearly. There's a lot of laughter, as you mentioned, a lot of, you know, creativity, dancing, singing, because these are all ways of humanization, of survival, of resistance. And it's important to always highlight those in the face of so much violence and brutality.
Well, we commend you for always putting on these wonderful conferences. We learn so much at Celebrate Dissent, but also all the activism you do and bringing together all the activists. And we don't think a lot of Americans are really aware of what's going on in other parts of the country, of the world, involving ex-Muslims and what they go through. So thank you, Maryam Namazie.
Thank you to you, both of you, and of course, FFRF, for the ongoing support of these conferences. We couldn't do them without your support and you always being there as well. Maybe once we can have one in the United States, because I think these are important issues and we need to bring them to the public there and to your members. Thank you.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because Freethought matters.